So this year's topic of the Petersbeger Gespräche will be the data state of mind, and you, David Weinberger, will give actually the opening keynote to put this idea, data state of mind, in a bigger context. In your very first introduction, you were saying that all this data becomes so complex within the new networks we are working with. So data actually has a new status in comparison to what it was 20 years ago. How would you describe this change of the status data has today?
Well, it's gone from something that we actually tried to, in an odd way, we tried to minimize it. In the age of information, which we are now out of the age of information, we're in the age of connection or the network or whatever, but in the age of information, when data was first invented, because it is an invention, our machinery was not very powerful. And so we had to try to minimize the sort of information that we gathered. And in the 1950s, when computers were first introduced, becoming mainstream, the popular reaction against computers was based to a large degree upon the accurate perception that the new machinery of computing required complex things to be reduced to a relative handful of data. It looked like a lot of data to us at the time, and we worried about it, but in fact, we also knew that it was actually very little data, so that, for example, what a company would record in its personnel files, its data about the person, was famously very reduced. It was your identification number, the sort of information you need in order to send a check to somebody, but not any information about hobbies, about the sorts of things that your coworkers knew. So when data first arose, it was viewed, I think correctly, as having many benefits, but requiring a great reduction in what we were capturing, what we knew in our machinery about people. In the age of the web, a couple things happened to data that really transformed it. One is that, first of all, our machines are much more capable of handling huge amounts of data. Many of us have terabyte-sized hard drives now. Terabyte is a huge amount of data. In the 1950s, it was a huge, huge, huge amount of data. And second of all, these machines are networked, and so we have access to gigantic servers of just about unlimited capacity, or huge capacity. And because they're networked, the data, not only do we have much, much more of it, but two things happen because it's networked. In addition, one is that it becomes public, and the other is it becomes linked. It becomes public because in the new world of connection, this new age we're in, it's much easier to make data public than it is to keep it private. If you want to make something public, you just put it on a server and everybody can have at it. If you want to keep it private, you have to make decisions about which stuff you're going to keep private. You have to go through it. It's difficult. It's often much easier just to make it public. And second of all, the data is linked, or it's within a network that can easily link the data, which means that rather than sitting there as little atoms of facts, these atoms of facts now connect to other atoms of fact and, most importantly, connect back to metadata about them, which is what linked data is about, the linked open data standard. So this data becomes not simply atoms, but they become pointers. They point at their sources, so you can try to figure out how much you should trust them. They point out to other pieces of data, to the places that contain and use the data, and so forth. So much more data, much more public data, and much more useful data because it's so deeply linked.
Yeah. What kind of implication has this for companies?
Well, maybe the first implication is that companies ought to consider learning from the lesson of data commons in science and other realms, in science and government, for example, where it turns out that pooling data and making it widely available and including every piece of data you possibly can, short of data that would violate privacy or genuine company secrets. You take all of that and make it available internally. It'd be interesting to make a lot of that available externally too, and I'll get to that in a second. Make it available internally so that anybody connected to the company, any employee, can browse through it, control, sort of cast a fishing line into it, provide maybe tools that make it easier to visualize and traverse this data commons, and see what pieces put together, or people put together, because they will put together pieces that you are not expecting. There is a little risk in this because you're making available information that perhaps if it leaked would be upsetting, but companies generally way overestimate both the value of individual pieces of data and the danger, the risk of that information escaping. Most information that escapes from a company is trivial, nobody really cares. Which is actually the second point. One of the things companies can learn perhaps is that information is not an asset in the sense that something that has value simply because you hold it. It has use value, and the wider the use of the information, the greater its value. A datum by itself has zero value. It's only when it's connected up with other pieces of data, other pieces of information, that it gains value. Allowing more of this data, more of this information out into the world increases the value of the data and can increase the value of the data for the company as well. This is something that the internet overall has been teaching us. That information has value when linked, and that letting information go often, not always, but often turns out to so greatly increase the value of the information that it in turn increases the value of, in this case, the company that generated it.
Yeah, so when you are saying that companies actually should learn when they see what people are doing with the data they make available, I mean, all of a sudden, at least over here in Germany, the privacy issue pops up. How does this goes along with your ideas?
Well, we don't really know what we're doing with privacy right now. We are in a cultural battle over it. There's let's say, a generational difference. It's not that neat or clean. This disagreement about the importance and nature of privacy involves every aspect of our humanity. So it's not simply a matter of age and generation and technological comfort. It's also a socioeconomic issue as well, and a gender issue. So it is a very complex struggle that we are in, but we are in a struggle and we don't know how it's going to resolve. And so in the meantime, we're stuck having to fight these things out. And there are genuine issues around privacy. There are also genuine social and business benefits to allowing more information out rather than less. Nobody is, including or especially me, has an answer to this question. Companies will have to make up their own minds and take whatever precautions they consider to be appropriate, but it is, I think, crucial to recognize that the blanket assertion that privacy is the most important value, and in addition to have a fixed sense of what constitutes privacy, that is simply a mistake. It's not wrong, but it's a mistake to blindly make those assumptions.
Okay. So, and the last question when we look at companies would actually be, what kind of implications do you see on the technical side? I mean, this entire new data state of mind will have implications for technical infrastructure, will it?
Absolutely. So the type of data that we are used to dealing with in the information age before the web was information that was, first of all, fairly minimal. I know it seemed like a lot, but in fact, much of the job of the IT department was to design systems that collected the essential but therefore minimal amount of information, because our systems just weren't that scalable. And so personnel records famously contained actually very little information about the person, and not simply for privacy reasons. It was because our systems, you had punch cards back in the early days, and they just couldn't accommodate that much. And second of all, our systems were designed not just for a relatively small amount of information, but for information that fit very well into 2 dimensions, into a table, and then increasingly to be able to add additional 2-dimensional objects, more and more tables and relational systems. And you can do huge amounts of work with this. It's a flexible and efficient mechanism, but it's also one that is fairly limited in how it thinks. It's not a system you would come up with if you thought that The value of the information of any particular piece of information is in its open-ended ability to be connected with other pieces of information. That sounds much more like, say, a cloud. And in a cloud, not only is there a great abundance of the data commons, it is a huge abundance of information. It's open-ended in its size. The data itself is structured as links. This is the linked data idea, in which data is, in one sense, reduced to something very simple, into a triple of information, subject, predicate, object. But the key thing is that each of those terms, the subject, the predicate, and the object, are themselves links. And they're links pointing at authority files, which make it relatively easy for computer applications to pull together loosely related information, chains of linked data. So you get a very different sort of answer and a different sort of topology than you get if you are asking a SQL database to give you answers. Obviously, SQL databases have tremendous value. I'm not knocking them. But the change is thinking that we are putting things into tables into thinking that we are releasing things into a commons. And these things are incredibly sticky and linky. They are all sort of hooks and eyes, the ways you hook things together to change. That's what they're designed for. They're designed to be out of the control of the database designer and administrator. That's a very big change.
The last one, David, would be, companies are challenged by this new way of thinking. What do you think are the biggest challenges for the companies?
The challenges are really very broad and difficult because this is an opportunity, and it is an enormous opportunity because it is so open. We don't yet know what the world's going to be like, what the technologies are that are going to arise. So the challenge is, first of all, to stay open to the possibilities, which is not easy. There are good business reasons to make early decisions, but in this case, you definitely want to make your decisions future-proof and not lock yourself into one particular way of doing things. Do that as little as you can. So it is an insecure time, but it's insecure because of the enormous opportunities. There are obstacles in how we think about this. There are psychological obstacles around what we count as an asset and where the value of assets comes from. The lesson of the net is that frequently allowing things to be swept up into a web that extends beyond the company's boundaries will bring additional value to those assets. That can be a hard lesson to learn. So there are psychological and cultural impediments. And then there is the rapidly evolving and emerging technology itself. Some of the new standards, I think, are fairly safe to bet on. An open data approach, a big data approach in general, it seems like it is going to be a winner. And sticking, at least initially, with linked open data standards or linked data standards, which are themselves somewhat amorphous, but there's a general range of them. That seems like a good future-proof business decision to make as well. Nevertheless, it is the size of the opportunity that raises, I would say in this case, all of the obstacles and impediments.
So I think now we got a pretty good impression what we can expect from you at Petersberg. What is the other way around? What do you expect from Petersberg?
I'm very interested to talk with the CIOs who are attending, anybody who is thinking about the role of data, and particularly in practical and pragmatic ways. I have a great deal to learn from them. So I'm really looking forward to those discussions.
Okay.
Also the Beethoven.
Also the Beethoven, okay. So looking forward to see you there, and thanks a lot, David. Thank you.
Thank you.